everyone. Welcome along to the edie Extra stage at edie24, which is the sustainability event of the year. So, for those that haven't heard of edie Extra before, it's a new channel that we are launching, which is basically going to allow us to get closer to our audience of sustainability professional individuals. It's content that's tailored more towards the sustainability professional rather than the business in question. And we're going to be focused on teams, projects, and initiatives, and those kind of big question aspects that are driving corporate climate action in the UK and further afield. And at edie24, we've got a number of quick-fire discussions taking place at this stage today. This is number 2. We've got another one this afternoon as well. There is a live audience here for those that are watching and tuning in at home. And either way, you're all going to get access to what is a thought-provoking discussion on some of the biggest questions facing the sustainability movement. So thank you for those in the audience for coming, and thank you for those that are catching up via our video channel back home. So this session is focused on the elephant in the room. I did request we actually have some sort of elephant in the room, but from a sustainability aspect, the materials did not make sense. But the focus is, will we ever decouple business growth from environmental impact? I'm edie's editor, Matt Mace, and joining me for this discussion to discuss that big question, we have Will Ennett, who is the Head of Sustainability and ESG at TalkTalk. We have Haidan, the Chief Sustainability Officer for Virgin Media O2. And we have Simon Blackler, who is the founder and CEO of Krystal, who are kindly headline sponsors for these talks at edie24 for the next 2 days. So thank you all for joining me, first and foremost. So I thought I'd just start with a really easy, basic question, which is, is corporate growth at odds with combating the climate crisis? It sounds a little bit like an oxymoron, growth, when we're trying to reduce impact. So, Will, maybe I could come to you first on that.
Yeah, of course. So, no, thank you. It's a great question. And I think it's probably no coincidence that all the panelists here are in the, let's call it, digital industries, because we probably have a slightly easier time answering that question than maybe other sectors. So, one thing I think about is, how do you define growth, right? And so for us, for those who don't know, TalkTalk is a UK-based broadband provider, and we look at, for example, the significant growth we've seen in data traffic in the network, so 40% year on year over COVID, and it's not gone down, so it just keeps increasing, maybe not as quite as rapid a rate, but it still keeps increasing. But in that time, the energy usage in our operations has gone down by 1/3. In that time, some of our, let's say, networking partners, where we've put electricity through, and we see the metering has also been going down. So I guess what you might hear from others is that we are certainly starting to see, let's call it, Scope 1 and 2 emissions decouple from growth, whether that's financial growth, so EBITDA, margin, revenue, or whether it's, let's call it, units of economics, so in our case, data, gigs of traffic, whatever it might be. So it is decoupling.
And Donna, maybe we bring you in that as well.
Definitely. I mean, Will has kind of pointed out very kind of clearly that some industries and some sectors will find it easier than others. That's for sure. We in the kind of digital space or the telco space definitely have an opportunity not just to decouple our own growth, but also to help with decoupling the wider economy. Especially with digitization, there is that massive opportunity in us driving decarbonization at a large scale within the economy through things like remote working, through things like increasing public transport, even things like digital payments, making it easier for people to take on public transport rather than private. And so there are some ripple effects that can, using technology and digital connectivity, that can lead to that decoupling. Now, is it easy? Definitely not, even for industries like us. As Will mentioned, Scope 1 and 2, which are fully within our control, are much easier to decouple. And for us at Virgin Media O2, we have succeeded in doing that over the last couple of years. We've reduced our emissions, Scope 1 and 2, by 45% since 2020, while the business is still growing. The challenge comes when we talk about Scope 3, and that's where everybody, I think, will be struggling. And these are Scope 3, essentially our supply chain emissions. Supplier engagement will be absolutely key, but also technology will play a massive role. We're seeing corporates in some sectors that are doing really innovative things in order to hopefully achieve that decoupling, including creating kind of climate funds that invest in technologies and in developments that will help them kind of create a supply of technologies that will help them decarbonize their supply chain. Things like sustainable packaging being a good example in the FMCG sector. So while we're seeing some examples, it's not at a large scale enough where we can prove that it is working. We are, at the end of the day, as businesses, are dependent on the larger system and the wider system, and the wider system definitely has some catching up to do for sure.
Perfect, great. And Simon, I'd love to get Krystal's views on this kind of big, hairy question.
So the question again, please?
So is essentially climate impact and combating the climate crisis at odds with what business define as growth?
I feel like, and I might be the outlier here, I feel like actually the solution to a lot of our environmental problems is aligning processes with underlying human nature. That sounds a bit grandiose, but you're not going to escape the human condition. People like to build things, they like to buy, and I think it's a bit of an unrealistic ask to expect that everybody simultaneously is going to say, oh, you know what, I'm going to consume less, or I'm going to diminish my quality of life, or I'm going to sacrifice this thing, I'm not going to go on my annual holiday. And so I think that what needs to happen is a recognition of like playing to our strengths and weaknesses. Humans are inherently the problem. Like the obvious solution here would just be no more humans, and then the planet would right itself in a couple of years, right? But that's not going to happen. And I think it's also unrealistic to expect that businesses are going to embrace this idea that they shouldn't strive, or compete, or grow. It's anti our nature. I think what needs to happen is a stronger alignment where companies are embedding some concept of good into their business model. So I created Krystal 21 and a half years ago because I wanted to leave the world a better place than I found it, and I wanted to have a vehicle that would outlive me. And I figured if I could run a business that could attract resources and then put some of them into good work, then I could actually act as a concentrator and a focus. So now our clients don't have to care about being passionate about the environment. We sell them the best service, they pay us the money, and I take about 5% of that top line and I just put it into environmental good. That's the decoupling that's needed, because they buy what's good and then I do the responsible thing on the back end, and you need a much smaller number of people doing that at scale, I think, to solve the problem. I'll give you a good example. Apple throw off $50 billion in profit a year. So if they could have that awkward conversation with their shareholders, hey guys, for the next 10 years, we're not going to give you any dividends and we're not going to do any share buybacks, but we are going to put $500 billion into planetary benefit, wouldn't that have a pretty dramatic effect?
Yeah, it's few and far between cases that I think. I know Patagonia, obviously the most notable example, and we heard from Natalie Campbell earlier, and Bellu are doing exactly the same, but we feels like we're in the minority in that sense, and I want to kind of bring a bigger scale picture in the sense that we've got about 700 people in the audience today, not this audience, obviously we don't have enough chairs for that, but across the whole event we've got 700 people. Edie ran a survey in March, and we got about 350 respondents, so about half those people, all sustainability professionals, all kind of outlining their biggest kind of challenges right now. Obviously policy was a key one, but the overarching aspect that a lot of businesses are grappling with right now, and a lot of sustainability are grappling with right now, is the short-termism, the mindset shift that's happened in the last few years because of the economic downturn, because of cost of living crisis, and what businesses have are these kind of long-term decarbonisation, sustainability targets, your big North Stars to aim for, which feel like for a lot of businesses, is at odds with the short-term environment they find themselves in now. So is there a risk that too many businesses have reverted back to a short-term mindset, and then that they are just focused on protecting the bottom line, protecting growth, and are ignoring those big North Stars? And how can a sustainability professional kind of balance that kind of day-to-day operating with the need for that long-term vision in place? Dana, could I come to you first on that one?
Absolutely. It is an interesting time to be a sustainability professional, that's for sure. I've been doing this 17 years and I've never seen so much ESG backlash, especially, we're seeing a lot of it in the US, but also we're beginning to see these sentiments in the UK and Europe as well. A lot of it is being weaponized, I would say, by politics, and it's not really grounded in business needs in many ways, a lot of this narrative. But in reality, the way we see it is it's pure risk management and essentially looking at financial and non-financial risks. Now, the extent to which companies, how far would they go in order to balance some of these issues, of course, varies. But what we're seeing within the telco space is that the commitments have become a lot more ambitious over time. We are an industry that is expanding and that is facing so many headwinds, especially with various technology advancements surrounding the industry that we are trying to keep up with. But balancing some of that has been definitely a challenge. And the approach that we're taking is we are going to commit to long-term goals around our net zero transition, and we've committed to that to be net zero by 2040 across the entire value chain. This has been SBTi validated, and it's very much linked to our employee compensation, our leadership's compensation. We have all our financing, green financing, and therefore our access to capital heavily depends on us achieving these targets. That's for us what worked in making sure that we remain long-term focused. We are a post-merger business. We merged over 2 years ago, where Telefonica and Virgin Media in the UK merged their entities, which was the largest merger in the UK telco history. Now, naturally, that means a lot of the time we're going to be very short-term focused from a financial perspective. And so internally in the business, I have to be honest, it's quarter to quarter and making sure we're hitting the numbers. And that was a challenge for me when I took on this role, because I've never worked in a post-merger environment before. But making sure we're getting the business to commit at least to the decarbonization targets that are publicly communicated, that we are accountable for, that are validated, that are based and grounded in the science, has been a game changer. And making sure we embed these targets across as many systems internally as we can, like compensation, like capital access and others, has been absolutely key for us to make sure we are sticking to those long-term goals, no matter what happens on the short term.
Perfect. And Simon, from the clients that you're speaking to, is short-term mindset something that you're constantly having to have a conversation about and get them to switch, or are they built into this?
I don't think so. I think your point about a North Star is interesting, because one of my favourite analogies is if you're looking for a dim star at night, you don't look straight at it. You have to look off to the side and use your periphery vision, right? And I think that's the same thing with profit. If you stare straight at profit and try and chase it quarter to quarter, it evaporates, it disappears in front of you, right? Whereas if you're actually looking at something else, like quality of product, customer service, just doing the right thing, this weird thing happens where you make more money, right? So it's a win-win. So we don't really worry about that too much. We just worry about being the best and being honest and trading with integrity and doing the right thing. And surprisingly, I've never written a business plan, right? And I'm here nearly 22 years later, and we're beloved, because when you put our business next to other businesses that just chase profits, it turns out they're more poorly run. They're more efficient businesses. Maybe their capital deployment or return on capital is better, but they cut corners and they don't care about other things, and they don't imbue this spirit, and they're not attractive places to work in. And so I would just say that there's a reframing here that needs to happen. My previous point about human nature, I feel like a lot of the work we do doesn't understand that we're dealing with humans. Humans are the problem, they're also the solution, but they're not going to be the solution if you don't understand what makes us tick, right? And at the moment, a lot of the solutions seem to be like counterculture, like, yeah, you're going to have to sacrifice something. No thanks. Your life's going to have to get worse. Nah. Or you're shaming people. You're talking about their carbon footprint. We're blaming individuals. and we're saying, don't fly on that cheap jet somewhere for your holiday, instead of saying to the big corporations, why don't you pull your weight? We should be telling people to stop lobbying. Lobbying should be prohibited, so that we don't have vested interests able to stay on top of their like Smaug, right? They're protecting their pot of their treasure trove, and that's the problem. We need to break that. We need to break that cycle. There are plenty of businesses out there who want to do the right thing. They want to sell a service and they want to support a community. We need to promote those people and allow them to succeed, instead of just being dominated by a few people at the top who have got very good at extracting money from us while having no integrity.
That's great point. And Will, Donna touched on some of the internal mechanisms that Virgin Media O2 have used to kind of really keep that long-term vision in place. What is it that you guys are doing at TalkTalk to really drive that?
I think I actually try not to talk too much about the long term, because it is very far away. And as you say, there's quarterly cycles, there's annual cycles, and there's a lot of very short-term horizon goals that we have to meet. So what I tend to focus on is the fact that we're in an environment, so as Dan alluded to, nearly every UK telecom has got, let's say, validated science-based targets, including ourselves, where so basically we are on the treadmill and we can't jump off. The so two areas of the business, and there are structural changes going on, but if you take B2B, so business-to-business sales of broadband and security and other type services to customers, the vast majority of our income is with companies who have explicitly asked us, what's your carbon footprint? What are you going to do to reduce it? Have you got science? So that is the business case. It's quite elementary, really. Let alone the investor. Investors are a bit more kind of up and down. The business customers is a very steady stream of requests. So I know it's not maybe too inspiring a story, but that's really what we do, is try not to talk about the long term, try and talk about the short term. And again, because of those, because, for example, Scope 3 is now absolutely fundamental to those questionnaires and the risk about, could we lose those businesses? We then have to tackle it, and we have to sort of get our hands dirty and messy and try and deal with it. And I think, where Scope 1 and 2, all the reductions has just been a cost benefit. We've seen massive cost transformation in our data centers and operations to achieve that. So two different sides of the coin, and probably, larger scale, so I could talk about this probably. The other cost one is obviously around refurbishment, and how do we create either longer life span of devices, get them back into back into us and back out into the field. Again, we put a carbon number to it, and it's good and it's growing every year, but really what the business is interested in is the pounds and pence saved, which is obviously many millions. So that's what we focus on.
I might add a point here very quickly on the long-term goals, and you make a very good point on there is a balance between, even on the carbon targets that are set, there has to be a short-term view. And this has definitely been our experience, where because the carbon accounting models are evolving, we're seeing SBTi as well very likely to update their model because of Scope 3, and we're seeing other standards as well following the same steps, and it's just an evolving science all the time. And so we're finding ourselves having to rebase our targets and trying to keep up on the short term in order to make sure that it is, if you are trying to be authentic, you're going to have to be as close to the science as you can be, but that comes with the risk of the fact that it's evolving, and you're going to have to rebase sometimes once a year in order to really make sure your targets are authentic and actually leading, kind of resulting in that impact that you hope to see. But the issue as well with Scope 3 in particular, we're finding the better our data is, because everybody's struggling with data quality around Scope 3, but the reality is the better your data is, the worse your numbers will be, and therefore the worse kind of your performance will be. And so having to grapple with these short-term challenges, even within those long-term targets, has definitely been an interesting journey, and I wish more companies talk about those challenges, because we all stand to learn from each other about what we're going through as we navigate these.
And We hosted our edie Awards at the start of the month, and we had Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, on as our kind of guest of honour. She did a speech for everyone, and one of the key things she kind of said that really stood out with me, and her whole speech is up on the edie website if you want to check it out later, is that GDP is a terrible metric for growth, and I know this is more of a kind of national policy aspect, and we've spoken a lot about the pure play on profits, and there are even some businesses that might kind of link emissions reductions to kind of turnover and aspects like that rather than absolute. How can businesses, and Simon, I'll probably bring you in because you made a really good point about not just focusing on profit, but in terms of rethinking what growth means, how can that be done so it's not just about those pounds and pence that we've spoken about, that other value creation and other growth creation is accounted for?
I'd absolutely agree with Caroline. Like, GDP is a very simple, lazy metric that allows you to compare ostensibly things like one to one and go, yeah, we're winning, we're improving, but it's a terrible metric for nearly everything else. You know, it doesn't capture happiness, it doesn't capture good benefit, so it's a terrible metric. I think what would be quite interesting is something like net beneficial impact as a percentage. You know, literally take a company, its turnover, how much of that is going towards good, or how much of it does it, you know, there's 1% for the planet, for example, we're members of that, and that's quite a low bar. 1% of our turnover has to go, at least 1% of our turnover has to go towards things. That's a better metric. That's an interesting metric that actually allows you to make choices between companies, because people will follow the money, right? If you've got businesses that are doing well because they're actually truly embracing the environmental future, over time, as citizens wake up and consumers, it's a terrible word, but as consumers start thinking, oh, where I spend my money matters, and they're able to bring up an index that gives them a quick comparator, give them the choice between two equal outcomes, they'll definitely pick the one that they think does the more good. And then, behind that, the businesses that didn't care will then align. So I think I'd love to see a single metric that can be calculated from turnover. It can't be based on profit because you can fudge profit. So it has to be based on turnover, and then has some metric that sort of talks about measuring the impact you have. That would be amazing. Probably needs to be passed into law. Probably needs to be supranational or at least globally adopted. But that'd be amazing, and maybe it could accompany the carbon market sort of work, so that there's some concept of when you don't hit or you're short, then you have to make it up.
I think this is a great question to be able to ask to in the digital telecom space, because I think value for you isn't just pure profits as well. Your role in society is kind of connecting people up. We're in this kind of post-COVID hybrid working space. We know that kind of loneliness is becoming a little bit of an epidemic amongst certain communities. Is that something that you guys like pride your value on, and is that something you would start to measure as your growth impact? Or Dan, if you come to you first.
I mean, for us, we non-financial metrics are a big part of our overall company performance, and that's and I mean, our annual report is an integrated report that incorporates our non-financial metrics as well as our financial metrics, and it's always been the case. And so, I mean, you mentioned GDP, and it's on a national level. I think we're seeing, yes, GDP is the one number that matters, but on a corporate level, we're seeing increasingly it's not just about EBITDA, for example. It is also about key non-financial metrics that are material to the company, especially if it's a public company. Investors definitely will want to see all of these metrics together and how they track. Of course, financial performance will always kind of take priority. However, non-financial performance will always be questioned if it's not meeting the expectations of like key stakeholders. And so, I mean, we're definitely seeing as I said, there's various stakeholders expecting us, especially customers as well. We're seeing customers who are very loud and vocal about, for example, us providing secondhand devices, making sure that we provide social tariffs, making sure we provide affordable connectivity. So there are certain expectations as well from customers. And we have done a lot of work as VMware too. I mean, digital inclusion and data poverty is a big part of our sustainability strategy. We founded the National Data Bank for the past 2 years in partnership with the Good Things Foundation. And what essentially it is just a food bank, but for data. We have 3,000 hubs around the UK. Anyone in the UK who needs connectivity, they can walk in, ask for free connectivity, and they get it. No questions asked, no eligibility criteria, and they get six months mobile connectivity for free. And we're seeing after COVID, their need for that service has skyrocketed over the last 2 years. And so there is a part of what we do as telcos where we're just going to have to prioritize public good in some certain areas, and other areas where, of course, it's going to be the business objectives will have to be prioritized. But together, we're seeing definitely telcos are not just your internet provider and your TV streaming service provider. There's a responsibility that is expected from us to also target those vulnerable customers that are unable to afford connectivity. And there's 10 million households in the UK that are unable to afford connectivity at the moment at 2024, which blows my mind, but it's still a big issue.
Will, I'd love to bring you on that point as well.
Well, I think that the first thing is really interesting is I was thinking from a historical perspective, maybe when I sort of started my career, bonuses and employee performance was all around usually revenue and EBITDA. And if you look at the last maybe 10 years, actually a lot of non-financial metrics have crept in. NPS, Net Promoter Score, customer satisfaction, that type of scoring has come in. Employee engagement, of sometimes ENPS, or that type of thing. Scores around digital transformation. So I think the challenge is, and a bit like VMO2 for the last 2 years, we've been fortunate that for the climate metric in that sort of bonus scorecard as well. But actually, me fighting my corner, I just like it to be a bit higher. I want it to be higher, or even the most important thing. But obviously, that's not. There's a sort of a balancing act. So I think that's the first thing, and I haven't got an answer, but what I am trying to do is really learn from some of those other waves of transformation that corporations have gone through over the last 15 years and go what was really successful? Like digital transformation seems to be given, or employee engagement and some of these other ones, and how did they do that? So we can try and learn the lessons to put climate, sustainability, and all those both social and environmental matters kind of in the top there as well. I think to just to echo what Dana said, absolutely, aside from the environmental side, there's significant, importance as a business to act sort of ethically. We have a partnership with the Department for Work and Pensions in the UK, which is basically free broadband for job seekers who don't have broadband access, because it was established that one of the big barriers to getting a job was just the fact that so many job applications are online that need internet to research. So that's one of the initiatives that we work on.
I'm glad you mentioned transformation, actually, because it's where I want to focus. We've got 10 minutes, so I've got a couple more questions I want to get through, so if we can keep the answers relatively brief, which I appreciate is tough when we're talking about such a big subject. But we've seen a lot of examples of a kind of a green transformation or a low carbon transition, net zero transition, whatever you call it. And there are some sectors, you're looking at kind of energy companies which historically have just sold off their oil and gas assets and called themselves green. They are now green by association, they just focus on renewables. But those oil and gas assets are still there. And what I want to talk about is this green transformation is without shifting the problem elsewhere. And I suppose it's part of the just transition, making sure you bring everyone on the journey with you. You spoke about the supply chain earlier and having their conversations. How can you ensure that this kind of green transformation has, and in the same way, if I'm trying to lose weight, I'm not just going to cut my leg off. It doesn't work. In the same way, if you guys are trying to reduce your impact, it doesn't make sense just to let go of things, because those things still exist outside of your remit. So how are you bringing the supply chain, how are you bringing other parts of the sector with you on a just transition with this focus on sustainable growth and emissions reduction? So I'm actually going to start with Will on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll have one story from the other day, talking about sustainable growth, let's say, is we sell some security products to businesses, and I was talking to them about this, and they were saying, look, we've got a new product where we used to put in the business, like an office used to have hardware for the security system. Now it's cloud-based. I was like, all right, okay. So I started doing the maths, and I realized, on that per product basis, that is, growing our revenue, trying to grow into new services like, security, but software based. So the incremental emissions for every pound of revenue added is going to be very small. So obviously my plea is, look, can we just do that and just only do this, please? let's only sell this product because it's great. So I think there are ways and means, and that's the key, isn't it? Is probably an element about how can you change the dynamics of, let's say, the total package of what you sell to still deliver the same value and at a sort of a lower environmental impact. And so the last point, because I know we have to keep it to time, but just one other thought I had is the other advantage I think we structurally have is we tend to be more subscription-based businesses. So our value is based on selling subscriptions, and as long as the customer's happy with that, so we'd maybe not got that same total impetus at all times to be constantly selling an additional product for margin. And I think again, that might be something that people, very hard to do to shift your business model, but that could be another interesting route to decarbonization.
Don, I'd love to bring you. You mentioned the merger. That's kind of been a massive change for
yeah.
too. So how are you kind of incorporating everyone in the supply chain on your journey?
Yeah, and we're starting the Scope 3, our Scope 3 work for now 6 months now. Definitely it's been an eye-opening experience to say the least. We're a UK entity, but of course through our supply chain, we have fingerprints all over the world through that supply chain. And so just to not repeat some of the things that Will shared, I mean, for me, the whole idea of just transition within the corporate space there is a bigger question around climate financing and how that feeds those countries that are meant to be, especially Africa, for example. We have a big percentage of the supply chain that is spread between Africa and Asia. These countries right now are seen as beneficiary countries in terms of climate financing, when in reality, I think we need to shift the way we think about them as opportunity markets rather than beneficiary markets. And for example, Africa, the solar power of Africa is incredible. 60% of it is untapped. How do we kind of work with our supply chain to make sure, especially the bigger players within our supply chain that have footprints in those regions, in order to invest in the right infrastructures within those regions to really stimulate that, first of all, renewables, but also to stimulate decarbonization at a global level. And we are pushing our suppliers and we are asking the right questions, but definitely the idea of it being a just transition at the moment is not really embedded. It's just those regions are seen as beneficiary markets, when in reality some of them are incredible opportunity markets if they're thought about in that way.
Okay. And yes, I'd love to bring you that in and just kind of how we bring everyone in on this sustainable transformation, which somehow reduces impact whilst providing services.
Yeah, I don't think you're going to have, this is back to the human condition point, I don't think you're going to have the environmental revolution we need without social justice. So there's a big gap to close there, because we're still trying to solve these problems as if they're separate. Like, we'll sort the environment thing first, and then we'll deal with the fact that there's massive injustice in social. But you're not going to be able to do them separate. Part of the cynic in me thinks that maybe that's by design. That there are interests who are trying to keep these things separate because they benefit from either social injustice or environmental injustice, effectively. Some of the things we've done, I think, are quite simple. We plant a tree every month for every client that we have, and we've planted over 5.5 million trees. That's, in its own right, okay, but what's interesting is that when you start doing that, other businesses look at it and go, oh, that's kind of cool, we should do that too. And we took our data center, we don't own our data center, but we paid for the data center to move to a renewable supplier in 2017. So, we were like, your fuel source isn't great, can we have a chat about it? And they said, well, it's going to cost a bunch of money. And I said, well, I'll pay for it. So I paid for the whole data center to go renewable, and they deal with hundreds of clients. So we paid for them to convert it. They then found that clients loved it. And then we have another final story. We made this solar punk kind of vision of our world of Krystopia, this better world that we envisage, that we will get to, by the way. We have to get to it, so I'm confident we'll get there. And one of our other suppliers said, yeah, we were so inspired by what you did that we put solar on the roof. right? So there's just a few examples where, you know, you just take, I don't even want to call it leadership because it's common sense, but you just do something that's a bit common sense but maybe not standard, and then a bunch of other people go, oh yeah, well we should do that, because they've got somebody to follow. So I don't want to say it's leadership, but at least someone else went first. And then it makes sense every which way you cut it. That warehouse is reducing its running costs. Yeah, and there's lots of little things that you can do there by just providing a source of inspiration or an example.
Yeah, no, I really like the name of the First Movers Coalition, which is this big kind of global, because it's just, move first and people will follow. Completely agree. Just in the interest of time, I want to kind of just finish on a kind of a look to the future then, and because as a journalist who's been in this space for 8 years, you know, I've written a lot about business efficiency and how to kind of be more energy efficient and resource efficiency. I've written a lot more recently about business resiliency and how to be more resilient as the climate changes and impacts happen. But one thing I haven't really been able to write about as much as what would be this thing I suppose called business sufficiency, where businesses decide that they are sufficient. Their growth models are enough. We are producing enough. We are providing the right amount of services. We don't need to be bigger. If you look at it through the lens of net zero, that is the kind of, at least for now, the end goal. A business is essentially removing its contribution to emissions and saying it's done. So how would you guys, bear in mind we've got an audience here who are probably thinking, well, how do I go away and define growth in a sustainable way to my business? Through the lens of kind of this new paradigm we want to enter into, how would you describe what sustainable growth looks like to you? And it might not be where we're there yet, but in terms of the blue sky thinking vision, where would you like to get to? Simon, I'm going to pick on you to go first, if that's okay.
Great. So I think we need to recognise that there are horses for courses, right? There are plenty of people. There's 5.9 million businesses in the UK, and the long tail of that has, you know, the vast majority of them with turnover of probably less than 50,000 and maybe 1 or 2 employees, or no employees. They might be mum and pop outfits. And a lot of those people want to run a lifestyle business, for want of a better word, right? And in those instances, I can see absolutely sufficiency being I want to get this business to the point where it means that I do some productive thing that gives me value and makes me feel good, and I'm not harmful, and it provides a livelihood for me and my family. But I think it's unrealistic to expect the other group of people to go, that's enough. You know, that's just not in the nature of quite a lot of people. They want to be the best, they want to compete, they want to be the biggest and best business. So I don't think and whatever you don't get those guys to subscribe to and adopt sufficiency, it's rather moot, because they're the people that are doing the most harm. They're the big players that have this global footprint who can crush civil rights and social and cause environmental damage just as they move their enormous multinational limbs across the planet. So those people, we need a culture change that is going to take a while to bring around, but will probably be bottom up as shareholders and citizens put enough pressure on them that they're forced to change. But I don't think you'll ever get to sufficiency for those people. But we maybe don't need to aim for sufficiency for those people, because the bigger they get, if they are mandated to or compelled to actually make sure a portion of their turnover goes to good causes, they'll become net beneficial actors. They will become the solution, because organised benefit could be very powerful compared to disorganised harm. That's my hope, that in business we actually have the solution we need. We just need to re-educate, you know, a relatively small number of people at the top of some of these big businesses, or replace them with people who get it.
Perfect. No, thank you very much. Simon, we'll come to you next.
Yeah, really difficult question. So I was just trying to think about that. I mean, for most, let's say, European markets, the industry that we're in, telecoms is quite very mature, probably let's call it post-mature. I mean, it's quite saturated industry. There's not a lot of new growth, so it is substitutional. So, you know, in some respects, there already is a degree of sufficiency in a way that, and so for me, more what I sort of think about, you know, with my peers, is whenever there will be a new breakthrough, there will be a new technology which maybe changes the the dynamics, and that creates a growth opportunity. And at that point, I guess we just got to go back to those fundamental design principles. I think it was the Design Council that said like 20 years ago, 80% of the carbon footprint of a product is embodied at the design phase. So, so I guess it's for those newer technologies. How can we make sure that they're more sustainable? I mean, sorry, very quickly, talk about Bitcoin having the emissions of Norway and all that, and I guess there was 2 design fails with that. The first is it actually incentivized energy consumption, not energy efficiency. That was the fundamental heart of mining Bitcoin. And the second one is just the input of energy was all, dirtier grids. So I guess, if we try to keep that in our minds, or when we have that new technology breakthrough, how can we reverse that so that all the incentives are aligned towards, aligning to net zero?
Perfect. And Dana, last short words from you. If that's okay.
Short words. I mean, I'm going to be pragmatic. As long as GDP is the measure, it's going to be very difficult because companies not growing will impact GDP, and GDP has political power. And so until we figure out a way where GDP is not that one number, but rather a dashboard of various different metrics, including environmental and social, it's going to be very difficult for businesses not to kind of think about degrowth or slow growth, because it has political power, and politicians politically live or die based on what GDP does during their reign. And so, but I do think that telco space stands much higher chance than other sectors in hitting that sustainable growth goal, because we are seeing it. We're seeing, as Will mentioned, we're seeing the entire sector is growing slower than it used to, and that's because of just too much competition at the moment, in the UK at least. But also digitization has contributed to decarbonization over the last 10 to 15 years in massive ways, on a kind of personal level, but also on a national level. And through renewable energy use through the network, through figuring out how do we, even the hardware side of the equation, and how do we build hardware in a more sustainable way, we are getting there, but just not as fast as we need to. And so definitely, I would say the telco sector stands a much higher chance to hit that sustainable growth target than other sectors, perhaps.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that. We are fresh out of time, but I think this is the type of conversation we could probably have every year at Edie, and the conversation would change slightly, and we'd be closer and closer to that kind of destination we want to get to. But as you guys have mentioned, there's a mindset and a culture change that isn't just unique to businesses for this. It is that every kind of stakeholder involved. And we, Edie, will do our part to try and connect those people up so that change can happen. But I did want to extend a big thanks to our expert speakers today, so Will, Dana and Simon. Thank you so much for your time, and of course to Krystal for helping us put on these sessions. Also a big thank you to the live audience coming today during lunch to tune in. I hope you found this as insightful as I have. The editorial team will be back soon for more conversations at the Edie Extra stage. I think we've got our next one in the next break this afternoon. And we'll be covering all of the latest developments across the world of sustainable business via our Edie Extra channel, and that officially launches in a few weeks. So be sure to check out the website to access that new Edie Extra page. It can also be found by searching Edie Extra on SoundCloud, iTunes and Spotify. Not right now, but in a week or two you'll be able to find that. So until next time, thank you everyone, and goodbye.
Thanks.
So,